Welcome to Sidequests, the podcast that explores the strange, surprising, and often forgotten rabbit holes of history. Because sometimes history isn't what happens when people are trying to change the world. It's what happened when the world was making other plans. In 1932, the Australian military went to war. Not against another country. Not against rebels or invaders. Against emus. Okay, that's not what an emu actually sounds like. That's what I was expecting them to sound like, but it turns out it's more like this. This wasn't a joke. This was an official military operation complete with soldiers, Lewis machine guns, and field reports. And yet, the emus absolutely won. This is the story of how a wave of hungry birds turned post-war farmland into a battlefield, and how a nation's attempt to shoot its way out of a wildlife problem turned into one of the most unintentionally hilarious chapters in military history. So strap in, because our enemies are tall, feathered, and faster than you'd expect. After World War I, Australia faced a problem. They had thousands of returning soldiers who needed land and purpose. The government gave them grants, mostly in Western Australia, and encouraged them to farm. Unfortunately, the land was poor, the weather was unpredictable, and by the early 1930s, the Great Depression had hit, causing wheat prices to plummet. Morale was already low.
And then came the emus.
Tens of thousands of them. Each year during their seasonal migration, the emus moved from inland Australia toward the coast, cutting directly through these struggling farmlands. They trampled crops and knocked down protective fences, which, as an added insult, allowed rabbits, another destructive invasive species, to pour in behind them. For the farmers, their hard work was vanishing under a wave of feathers and bad luck. So desperate, they did what any citizen would do. They called the government.
That ought to do it. Thanks very much.
But not the Department of Agriculture. They called the Department of Defense. And astonishingly, the government agreed. They authorized an official military operation to send active duty soldiers armed with machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition to suppress the emu invasion. Thus began the Great Emu War. Spoiler alert, it did not go according to plan. The operation officially began in November 1932. Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery was placed in command, given 2 soldiers and 2 Lewis guns, World War I era machine guns. What he wasn't given was a strategy or any understanding of how emus behave in the wild. The first encounter came quickly. A flock of about 50 emus was spotted. The soldiers set up an ambush and opened fire. Instantly, the birds scattered. Turns out emus can run up to 30 miles per hour. When startled, they don't flee as a group.
They didn't hit a single emu
And run in every direction, making them nearly impossible to target effectively. Undeterred, Meredith and his men tried again, spotting a larger group of 1,000 emus. This time, the gun jammed almost immediately. The emus scattered again, completely unharmed. So they adapted. They mounted the Lewis gun on the back of a truck. This was arguably worse. The truck couldn't keep pace with the birds, and it bounced so violently across the rough terrain that the gunner couldn't aim accurately.
They didn't hit a single emu.
Meanwhile, the press had a field day. Headlines mocked the military's inability to defeat a bunch of overgrown birds. Cartoonists had a blast. Major Meredith, to his credit, famously said, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world." After the first week, the operation was already looking grim for the humans. Meredith and his men had fired nearly 2,500 rounds of ammunition. And how many emus had they actually killed? Roughly 200. That's a kill ratio of about 12 bullets per bird. The emus, in effect, had outmaneuvered the Australian army through sheer speed and unpredictable chaos. The soldiers were running low on ideas, and though farmers swore the birds were posting scouts to watch for them, the point was clear. The military couldn't make a dent in a population that numbered in the tens of thousands. By early December, the operation was quietly paused. Though political pressure forced a brief second attempt, the results were the same: a lot of noise, very few dead birds. Eventually, the government pulled the plug. Major Meredith was reassigned and the emus continued to roam free. The military's official line was that the operation had been inconclusive, which is military speak for, "We lost, but we'd rather not talk about it." The Great Emu War is now one of those stories that feels almost too ridiculous to be true, and yet it's completely real. Because it's so absurd, it's become a classic historical meme. There are Great Emu War t-shirts, video games, and pub trivia questions. But if you look past the feathers and the punchlines, there's a more grounded story underneath. It's about post-war hardship, struggling veterans, and a government trying to find a simple, powerful solution to a complex ecological and economic problem. And the emus? They weren't invaders. They were just migrating, eating, and surviving. In the end, the only real solution wasn't machine guns, but better fencing and local management. The war taught a nation a hard, absurd lesson in humility. The Great Emu War didn't shape empires or redraw borders. It didn't solve the problem it set out to fix. But it did give us a perfectly absurd reminder that history is full of misfires and that not every battle is worth fighting. That's it for today's Sidequest. If you enjoyed the detour, subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend who loves history's odd corners. This has been Sidequests, because history is what happens when the world is making other plans.